Hello viewers, thank you for tuning in yet again to Afya Jimudu TV, your health education channel. My good name is Omadhai Jogona, a reproductive health specialist. We shall be discussing the sexually transmitted infections. These are diseases or infections that are transmitted through sexual intercourse, but it's not limited to sexual intercourse alone. They can also be transmitted when your broken skin comes into contact with the fluids or blood of an infected person. They can also be transmitted through transfusion. They can also be transmitted by way of sharing injection. They can also be transmitted when infected fingers that are contaminated with the bacteria, especially of the genitalia, when they come into contact with your eyes or mouth or even your genitals, even when sex was not in play. And what are these causative agents or the germs that cause sexually transmitted diseases, including infections? It is good to know that or realize that we have a situation where they might bring about a disease. That is when we have the signs and symptoms. But then again, there are situations whereby they bring about no signs nor symptoms. So having no signs nor symptoms does not rule out the possibility of an infection. And even when you are not without signs nor symptoms, does not mean that you are immune to the infections. They might bring about or they bring about complications later on in future. Let us list these causative agents that bring about the diseases or infections. We have the bacteria, we have the viruses, we have the protozoan agents, we have the fungal infections, we also do have the parasites that will crawl and burrow into your skin. We shall begin with the bacteria. In the group of bacteria, we have the Treponema pallidum that will bring about or cause a disease called syphilis. We have the Neisseria gonorrhea, which will cause the gonorrhea disease. We have the Chlamydia trachomatis, which might bring about conjunctivitis, more common in our children who are being washed by their infected adults. We also have the non-gonococcal urethritis, whereby you have pain when passing urine and when it is not caused by the gonorrhea. We also have the ulcers of the genitals, which will be brought about by, other than syphilis, we have the granuloma inguinale. We also have the Haemophilus ducreyi, which will bring about chancroid. We also have the Mycoplasma genitalium, which will bring about ulcers in your genitals, and thus bring about the chances of you acquiring other infections, which could be viral. In the group of viruses, we have the HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus. We also have the human papilloma virus, which will bring about genital herpes, also cervical cancer. We also have the pox virus. We also have the hepatitis B. We also have the hepatitis A, and also have the hepatitis C. Not to forget that we also have the HTLV type 1 virus, that is the human T lymphotropic virus type 1, which also bring about leukemia in children and also in adults. We shall also go ahead and look at the protozoan agents that will bring about sexually transmitted infections. We have the Trichomonas vaginalis, which will infect both the men and women that are sexually active. We also have now the amoeba that was initially known to be in the alimentary canal or in the intestines, but owing to the awkward or perversion of behavior, we have the homosexuality. Now we do have amoeba or amoebiasis being another cause of sexually transmitted infection. We shall go on and look into the fungal infections, that is the vaginal candidiasis, though largely it comes about as because of change in the environment of the birth canal, that is the vagina. Usually you do have a pH of 4.5, but owing to changes, especially during pregnancies, they usually do happen. They do happen to come without being transmitted as a sexually transmitted infection, largely because the area is warm and moist and the environment becomes conducive. Then vaginal candidiasis might come about, but not as an STI. But then again, it might be transmitted as a sexually transmitted infection. We also have the parasites like the scabies. We also the pubic lice that might be transmitted as a or by way of sexual transmission. Let me say that these diseases combined will bring about problems in the whole of your body. When we say or when we mention sexually transmitted infections, people tend to limit that the infection is limited to the genitals. Not really. These bacteria, the viruses, will bring about meningitis. These infections will bring about cancer in your genitals, that is cervical cancer, uterine cancer, prostate cancer. They also bring about cancer in your throat. It will also bring about leukemias. These infections will see you in a mental hospital. A disease like complications of syphilis will bring about a mental disease. You also have a cardiac disease because of the same infections. You can have arthritis, which we call reactive arthritis, being brought about by infection by the Neisseria gonorrhea. So virtually all parts of your body will become or can become infected by the sexually transmitted infections. We shall look at the signs and symptoms of sexually transmitted infections, that is the STIs, where they are bringing about a disease. Remember, not being without signs or nor symptoms does not mean you are not infected. It is always good to get screened for the diseases or to rule out the possibility of an existing infection, especially whereby your partner has been to a health center or a hospital setting and they have been told that they are infected and there is need for their partner to be treated and screened for the same. What are these signs and symptoms? We have the common urethral discharge. We can have pain or a burning sensation when passing urine. You can also have an irritation or itching of the urethral opening. You can also have an abnormal, which is usually unusual vaginal discharge. You can also have ulcers of the genitals. We also have, could have in males scrotal painful swelling, that is testes that are tender and sore. We could also have painful or pain of the lower abdomen, which seemingly is not going away. This is commonly known as pelvic inflammatory disease. We could also have sore throat or a hoarse voice, especially for those who have oral sex. We could also have pain of the rectum, including a purulent, foul-smelling discharge coming from the anal orifice. We could also have the genital lesions or growths caused by HPV virus, that is the genital warts. We could also be having pain when having sex, that is dyspareunia, especially in women, and also bleeding, that is postcoital bleeding during sexual intercourse. We could also be having fever, nausea, and vomiting, especially when the bacteria or the virus will find its way into your blood circulation. Remember, my viewers, we do not screen routinely for all these sexually transmitted infections, even though they are known to bring about serious complications in later life. So it is always good to steer clear and avoid contracting these diseases. Like the human T lymphotropic virus type 1 will bring about leukemia to your children who are not involved in your sexual escapade. It will also bring about leukemia in you or your partner. It will bring about compression of the spinal cord and the nerve roots, and will have problems in your lower backache, neck, arm or leg, poor balance, coordination, abnormal reflexes. You also have difficulty in walking, loss of bowel and bladder function. That is, you'll have a stool or both stool and urine incontinence. So it is good always to make sure that you remain to one faithful partner. You always learn to use a condom. It is good to observe proper hygiene, since cleanliness will see away that you wash away some of these diseases. And some of them are very stubborn, in that even when you use soap and water, you are still in a capacity to transmit them to other uninfected persons. So my dear viewers and listeners, it is good for you to know that these sexually transmitted infections are here to stay, and they are spreading very fast because our behavior is also changing towards a particular direction. We are no longer living in a happy, stable marriage. We are no longer living in a stable community with our extended families. The fear of God is no longer there with us. We no longer fear our parents, thanks they stay and live far away from where we work. We no longer fear the public opinion that you are aware of. It is all over in the social media. We no longer fear the law, and what we fear is the pregnancy. We do not fear the sexually transmitted infections. We are also lacking in the knowledge of sexually transmitted infections, including diseases, and seemingly amongst our youth, we are not being afraid of failing to conceive or have children in future. That we are not. That is, we are not being afraid of being sterile, because these infections will bring about sterility. You might lose the ability to have children in future, and that is not limited to the women alone. That includes even men. Then we are no longer seemingly afraid of dying from these infections. Initially, we were afraid of the HIV and AIDS, but since the drugs are here with us, they prolong our life, we tend to think that it's only HIV that can bring about death. Also, these other sexually transmitted infections can bring about death, like cancers, which are terminal illnesses. The other thing we ought to do is that, or what is lacking, we are lacking absorbing interest. Of major concern is that the middle age group and the youth are lacking absorbing interests, work, leisure, and sports. What the youth and the middle age group are assuming to be leisure is when they drug themselves with alcohol. And when they drug themselves with the alcohol, their behavior becomes irresponsible. They cannot be in control, and they end up contracting all manner of sexually transmitted infections, which they'll carry back home to their families, and they'll pass on the infection to their family members, including the children, who will then carry the infections back to school, whereby they'll transmit the same to the other children. So, at large, the community becomes infected. So, it is good to know that these infections, that is the sexually transmitted infections, are vicious by any contemporary accounts. Also of importance to note is that when you are having sexual intercourse and the lady or the woman is not in the mood, they are likely to be dry. And when this happens, there is no lubrication. So there will be a lot of friction, bringing about wounds or lacerations, which will bring about pain, and also bleeding, which could be severe, and also it could be served as a source of a secondary infection from bacteria that initially was just inhabiting the skin without the cause of a disease. Also, it is good to be aware of the size of the manhood, that is the penile size, because sometimes it could be so huge, humongous, and it might mimic the tuskies. You don't actually remember going past the gate of the Amboseli National Park. It could be jumbo in size, and it might bring harm with it. These sexually transmitted infections can put you in a desperate situation that will mimic a desperate grazer somewhere in Masai Mara being mauled by the marsh pride, including the scavengers, not forgetting the heavy infestation by the worms and the ticks. You will have to go down. And this happens in the full glare of the helpless hospital staff, because sometimes they are not in a position to do anything. Remember, even if you have a health insurance cover, most of the times it is usually capped. So even when we are long gone, they'll have a bill to settle. So, dear viewers, thank you. See you in our next health educative shows. Please remember to subscribe, comment, and share.